China brought one of their warships around and did a circumnavigation of Australia just to prove what their capability is, and sort of it was a bit of a sign of intent. There'll be a lot more threats from cyber attacks coming, and it will come to all parts of our society.
Whatever it takes, because that will create prosperity for next generation Australians. So that's my very selfish idea of being AI sovereign.
If you were to mine that amount of raw uranium, that would power you for your lifetime, and you're only using 1% of that for you.
It's been a huge effort for the US just to bring back manufacturing of chips back to the US. I think it's something like 70 or 80% of that is in South Korea and Taiwan. In Western Australia, for example, we have 7,755 people on the priority wait list for social housing. 6 years ago, it was about 1,660. So that's a 350% increase.
What's the one major threat augmented by AI you think WA is least prepared for? Final panel for the day. Hope you guys are not tired of the fun questions we had and a few jokes here and there. This is a bit of a fun and transitioning panel, and we can go. There's nothing called no-go zone on this panel. So we were restricted from in the morning, but we are getting more freer by the evening. As you know, we're getting towards drinks. I want to start with Michelle. The idea of, as I've opened the day today, my vision or my intention as Australian to Australia to be AI sovereign to start with at a bare minimum, and then whatever it takes to be AI sovereign, whether it takes to be able to build chips, GPUs in Australia, to have large data centers, to keep Australian data and compute within our land, to have more power surplus so that we can compute all of it rather than going somewhere else, and then using third-party servers to data centers to compute, and having more water because you don't need to run the production. So whatever it takes, because that will create prosperity for next generation Australians. So that's my very selfish idea of being AI sovereign. But how do you see that yourself as the head of defense, being AI sovereign as an idea as national defense and then national resilience?
Thank you. Big question. I guess what we really are, and we've talked a lot about this today, about being in this new era of technology, and we've talked about AI, quantum, cyber, but we've really talked about them as being enablers. But we also sort of, from the lens that I look at it from, is I look these as part of the determinant of our national security, so that sovereignty that you talk about, and also part of global influence. But I'm going to probably step back a little bit and talk more from that geopolitical perspective. We are probably living in a bit more of an uncertain geopolitical world at the moment, which is sometimes I feel quite disappointed about people at times. But if we look around at what's happening in the world, you're seeing the US sort of pull back and become a little bit more focused internally. We're seeing China being quite aggressive towards, say, Taiwan. You're seeing Russia being quite aggressive against Ukraine. And so we're seeing a lot more instability within not just our own region, but globally. And so how does that affect us and our sovereignty? And so we then take an internal look at where Australia has come from. And so in that sort of, if we go back to that, I guess that comes from that post-Cold War era where we thought, let's all become liberalised and we'll all sort of go along happily. But not everybody decided to do that, and that's where these people are sort of starting to pop up and say, no, we want to go down this track. And so that was then when Australia has really taken a really sort of good hard look internally about where our risks are. And what we've realised is we're an island country, and that affords us some really fantastic opportunities in our country, and it's, probably one of the best places to live in the world, really. But we've also got a small population, and we've sort of stopped producing stuff. We're very good at digging and shipping, but we don't really produce a lot, which puts a bit of risk there. We also, during that period, sort of stopped investing in sort of defence. We just sort of flatlined our sort of defence spend. Therefore, we haven't been updating our capabilities, whereas others in the global perspective have actually been investing in defence. And you've now seen, I'm going to name China again, actually showing what their capabilities are like. Mm-hmm. And we saw at the beginning of this year, China brought one of their warships around and did a circumnavigation of Australia, just to prove what their capability is, and sort of, it was a bit of a sign of intent. Likewise, we look at what's happening in the South China Sea, and we are, and I'll go back to that beautiful island state, but because we don't produce a lot of our own things, a lot of our suppliers come in via those shipping lanes that we rely on coming through those regions. So therefore, we've all of a sudden realised, actually, we're quite at a risk. So that was then when the AUKUS Tri-Nation Security Pact came in between the US, the UK and Australia. And that was looking at two things. One, it was bringing in the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines into Australia. So that was a big technology transfer. And two, what we called the Pillar 2, which was those technology areas of AI, cyber, automation, undersea capabilities and hypersonics. And so that's where Australia has sort of drawn a line in the sand and saying, right, we are going to focus on those areas, but we're going to do it in a collaborative way with these three partners. And that was our way of being able to probably stand up some of these capabilities a lot faster to help develop that sovereignty. Now, the best thing about that, particularly for Western Australia and South Australia, are probably the two states that are going to benefit the most from this. That is going to see an industrial transformation in our state. As we see that uplift happening, we are going to need more skilled workforce, but it also brings that threat. So there'll be a lot more threats from cyber attacks coming, and it will come to all parts of our society. So we need to, as we grow our industrial base to support these endeavours, we are also going to have to grow our cybersecurity capabilities and that use of AI to sort of, I guess, support some of our decision making as that journey continues on.
Thank you for the context on the geopolitical. Can I go to David first? In terms of your background as an electrical engineer and your understanding on the chips is very relevant to this conversation. And then my initial intro on AI sovereignty, how do you see, because all the minerals what it'll take to make a chip is hair. So how might we, as in we've been talking about digging and sending, my American friends calls us, we are a first world economy, a first world country with a third world economy. As in we export cattle and rocks. So how might we use that opportunity and as a fourth industrial revolution to start taking that lead?
Well, it'd be great if we had a chip plant here, wouldn't it? But I guess if you think of what the cost of a chip plant is these days, you're talking about $20 billion for one chip plant. But when people talk about chip plants, what they don't really realise is that the core technology there is the extreme ultraviolet lithography technology, which is ASML. So they are very, their books are full in terms of who's buying those, and companies like Samsung and Intel and TSMC place orders for those machines years in advance. And so you've got to be realistic in terms of our opportunity around chips. Mm-hmm. It would be great, and certainly in a past life, that was a conversation I had with government to try and see whether we could do that. The appetite wasn't there. We had a focus on software rather than hardware, and it's interesting these days we're now seeing hardware as a strategic asset. And but has that ship sailed? I don't know, but certainly would take a tremendous effort. Our alliances would have to be very strong, and there's only a few countries that would be able to accommodate those sorts of factories. And you're seeing that with the CHIP Act in the US. It's being a huge effort for the US just to bring back manufacturing of chips back to the US. I think it's something like 70 or 80% of that is in South Korea and Taiwan. The US is very focused on that. There's a little bit of in Israel, and there's some in Ireland as well. But in terms of what we need, I think we need sovereignty in terms of our compute. And rather than just thinking about chips, we should be thinking about compute as a sovereign asset. Mm-hmm. And I think governments need to think about what is our compute strategy so that we're not relying on compute overseas, because we've got a few submarine cables. It could be very easy just to chop that off. If our alliances aren't strong and we have a fallout with key partners, our compute is going to be a real issue for our sovereignty, and I think we need to think strong and hard about that.
Mm-hmm. Mark, your background is fairly, at a bare minimum, eclectic. You run submarines, and you ran work as a nuclear engineer and an officer, and you flew planes as well. But as a chief nuclear officer, how do you see the conversation of energy playing as a bottleneck to achieve the compute, to achieve that compute sovereignty?
Well, yeah, energy is huge, specifically talking with AI and data centers. And that is the major bottleneck. I don't know if everyone is aware in this room, but the COP31 conference will be held in Turkey, basically at the foot of the new nuclear power station that Turkey is building. Now, I'm not going to here to promote nuclear energy in Australia, because that's somewhat of a contentious topic, but Australia is sitting on the largest uranium reserves on the planet. I'm a very visual person, so if everyone were to grab their glass that's at their table and hold it, if you were to mine that amount of raw uranium, that would power you for your lifetime, and you're only using 1% of that for you, right? So understanding that the world is going to triple their nuclear output, India wants to go 10x, and the United States wants to go 4 times that. There are 2 critical elements when it comes to nuclear energy that you need. You need uranium and you need zirconium. Wherever you find uranium, you find zirconium. If Australia wanted to really get into this, is while the ARPANS Act of 1998 banned the production of nuclear power in Australia, it also banned enrichment and fuel manufacturing. Australia has an opportunity to be a leader in the case of export of nuclear fuel for peaceful use in power around the world as the world is tripling nuclear energy.
Thank you. Michelle, from a point of view of, again, geopolitical, that complex situation, not just the trade route, if you can put some light on why Taiwan is an asset from an asset and critical location for people who are trying to be the leaders in the AI space globally, how Taiwan geopolitically plays a critical role, and then why US has interest in all other countries too as well.
Taiwan produces lots of the chips, so that's where those supply chains come into effect. There's also, I guess, that China, wants to take over or to own Taiwan, whereas others around the world, including Australia, are more like to see them retain their independence, because it does actually provide that sort of a bit more of a better balance around the world. And look, Australia does play has a very tricky position, because China is also one of our biggest, or it is our biggest trading partner. So we have this sort of bit of a tug of war around the security side versus the trade side, and that continues to play out, because the security of those shipping lanes and also the subsea cables is a really important and very something that Australia needs to actually continue to basically survive, because we need those, and so that's there. And Taiwan probably is the one that provides, I guess, the chips that actually runs the compute power. All of our phones, all of those electronic devices that we use in our everyday life has a genesis, generally from Taiwan or a couple of the other countries, but they're the main supplier.
Thank you, Michelle. David, can I come to you in terms of, as you talked about compute, energy surplus is critical, and energy growth and that infrastructure to grow is also critical. How do you see that conversation happening at a state level? Are we only focusing on consumer and industrial requirements of energy at a state level, or we have factored in the calculations of, because our user base of compute and AI are increasing, and if you want to be at the cutting edge of research and innovation, how can we not create energy as the bottleneck for us to grow?
Well, I agree. I think energy is the bottleneck. And if you take a modern data centre now, which could be 300, 500 megawatts each, and the bigger ones now you're talking about, Grok, I think, are planning on a gigawatt data centre, and even UAI are looking at 3 or 5 gigawatt data centres. We haven't factored that, I don't believe, into our modelling in terms of our power requirements. We're requiring the industry to basically develop their own energy strategy around that. In terms of opportunities for Australia, I think that green transition, there is an opportunity for us to be leaders in that field. But when you're talking about 1 gigawatt data centres, and we've got a lot of data centre companies looking at Australia because of its isolation and opportunities here, I don't think we've factored that in well, and I think that's a strategic area that the government needs to start to look at.
And Mark, most of the large AI companies, there are 4 American and 1 Chinese at the back end, and there are tools built on them. So these AI companies are investing into now energy infrastructure. And what do you see the energy mix in that infrastructure they are going towards? And then what are they preferring over what? And because they need more power to secure, to create, and to compute.
It's actually very well known in the U.S. that we are restarting as many old shut down nuclear power stations for our tech companies. 3 Mile Island Unit 1, which was not the one that melted down, is being restarted to support Microsoft. They're in the process of restarting a nuclear reactor for that purposes. For scale, when you're talking about a 1 gigawatt data center, that's about the size of a large-scale nuclear reactor's output, is about 1 gigawatt. So, that's a lot of power. When you look at the U.S. has about 100 reactors, 100 gigawatts of energy, 20% of our power, right? You're literally each one of those. We're talking about a data center, 1 gigawatt, that's a large amount of power, like 2 million homes worth.
Thank you. I have a question for Michelle from Slido. Thank you for the question. What is Defence stance on AI with respect to information being confidential or sensitive? How is it being implemented while ensuring national security?
Thank you. That's a good question. It is something that Defence is very focused on, and it's what we call about our trusted AI. And there's a real big focus on, how do we keep that information and that data secure? Particularly in an environment at the moment, and this sort of comes to a bit of that, I guess, it was touched on earlier around the social license. It's about having that trust in the AI, and AI is only as good as the information that's within it. And it's how do you keep that information secure? And that's there, and that is a big piece that you're working on. And it's, and it's the information that's in all parts of the system, not just, there's your the personnel security and all of that, but there's also the trust in the autonomy type part of the system as well, particularly when you start putting autonomy into, say, undersea vehicles or drones, things like that, things that then become a capability that link up with other parts of the defence chain. And so it is a critical area that Defence is very focused on, and is an area that is probably emerging as one of those areas that we're really focusing on from a research and science perspective to try and uplift that capability. But that's where that information sharing through the AUKUS pack is actually, having that discussion with the US about, well, where are you up to in developing those technologies and those protection around that. And we talked earlier, I think it was Peter Bullis in the first session today was talking about the Essential 8 cybersecurity. So we're looking or Defence is looking at that as actually going above Essential 8. So actually going to this gold standard level of cybersecurity to really try and protect that information.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add on to that? One of the things that we're doing at UBH is taking radio communications, feeding it into an AI that can control cameras and other things where it can actually control direction. Instead of actually having a radio transmission go to an operator to then operate a camera, I could have an operator in the field make that radio transmission, goes into the AI, does that voice to text, turns that text into a command, into a camera, so I have removed an operator from that sense. That's something that we are working on right now for Defence.
I think I'll follow up on that one again. Follow up on that one. When you were talking, you are a defense contractor and then you are using your sovereign AI. Can you talk a bit more what kind of AI you're using and the structure of it? Yeah,
we started with the ChatGPT kernel and have made it compliant with the DISP environment. So within UBH Group, we actually are using a DISP-compliant secure AI chat so that we actually utilize it for our own internal documentation. I used it to develop a proposal this week, big proposal that we're doing. My wife's company is really jealous because they're going to take months, but they're a giant company, and my company that's much smaller, we're almost done with it, and we literally started it last week. So, the ability to utilize that where we have our data secure, it doesn't go into the cloud environment because it meets that DISP accreditation where all of our data is contained within our servers, our internal cloud. But being able to access that with control access through our firewalls where that AI has challenged what it cannot do. But the big thing is by having our AI engineers that can do that and develop it, we have great people that can teach us how to use the AI clients. And so we use our AI daily within my company.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can I just add on to that? Mark used an acronym that probably you and I all know, but people here, DISP is like Defence Industry Security Program. So anyone who is a contractor to Defence or is within that Defence sort of area has to be accredited through DISP. And that actually demonstrates to Defence that you have the right levels of security to reduce the vulnerability to Defence on information supply and integrity.
Thank you, Shell. David, another question from Slido, and thank you for this question. How do you see the basic need for affordable electricity and water being impacted by the need of our compute data centers to the ordinary Western Australian? How is your ministry planning to balance the competing need for a household and AI?
Well, I'll get political for a minute. Look, we need to be agnostic, I think, to the technology. We're seeing most countries around the world are agnostic to the technology, and we certainly believe that we need to transition to cleaner, greener energy. But we're not going to keep up with the demands if we're on the trajectory that we're seeing with AI demand. And we're only at the start of this huge growth. And while there'll be bumps along the way, we can only just see it getting further and further. So we need to be agnostic to the type of energy needs that technology needs, and we need to do that quickly. At the moment in Australia, we don't even have approval to in Western Australia mine uranium. So while everybody else around the world is using nuclear reactors to supplement some of their energy needs, they're using solar and wind and gas and coal, but they're also using nuclear. We need to really think about our policies around that. But ultimately, in the longer term, we need to have an open discussion with the Australian people about what sovereign energy looks like, and affordable, reliable energy, and I think it needs to be agnostic to the technology.
And to kind of tack on that, Australia can't do what Germany did, which was they shut down all their nuclear reactors, and then they just rely on France's nuclear power as their energy source. I mean,
Okay.
They don't rely on French nuclear reactors. The net import of power across that country goes about 85% from Germany to France, not the other way around.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll have another question for Mark. It says, I see nuclear engineering, AI chips, and quantum as good areas for our kids to focus on as their potential work domains. What is your opinion on that?
well, I mean, yes, with the demand going up and nuclear tripling around the world, there's a huge opportunity there. And then when you're looking at chips, right, there's demands all over for that. I don't know if you know this about Australia, but Australia is one of the largest suppliers of neutron-doped silicon at your reactor in Ansto. So the Opal reactor actually uses the neutrons from its nuclear reaction to make the silicon wafers, or to make the silicon slugs that are then turned into wafers that go into high-end electronics. So the fact is that nuclear has a huge amount of industry capability that Australia is touching a little bit on, but there's a huge amount of opportunities from a nuclear perspective that could be utilized not just in Australia, but internationally.
Michelle, question which is political and science-based. How can we have rational discussion in the public sphere where science matters over politics, where science or facts takes precedence over politics or which side you're sitting on or standing on?
Look, I'm a big believer in science. What concerns me somewhat at the moment, particularly a lot around the social media and that, a lot of us, I'm going to generalise, but this is my personal view. A lot of people seem to be a lot more willing to just listen to a social media influencer than actually listen to the hard science facts. Now, I don't know if we're not communicating science and the legitimacy of science well enough, but I are very strong that we really need to actually promote our science a lot more than that we do. We really need to uplift and build up that real understanding of the importance of science, and that needs to happen across all layers. And we need that support. I feel even our governments need to actually promote the fact that science is the basis of how we actually become prosperous and how we develop that sovereignty going forward. Because we're going to need that. That earlier question around, is quantum a good area for our kids to go into? Absolutely, yes. Because we need to, not only do we need to start thinking about quantum, but we need to think about that post-quantum. So if once they, through quantum, if we can crack that cryptography element, then that just changes the game again. Mm-hmm. And so we need to really focus in on the science.
David, a portfolio-based question. How can homelessness be addressed using AI?
Well, it's a good question in terms of, look, AI will permeate all fields, we know that. And so even in housing is a critical issue for Australia at the moment. In Western Australia, for example, we have 7,755 people on the priority wait list for social housing. 6 years ago, it was about 1,660. Mm-hmm. So that's a 350% increase. Now that's become a major issue society-wide. People can't get a house. And so one of the things that the industry is telling us is, we need productivity in the housing sector. And I think AI can play a part in terms of approvals for, if you're going to approve a land development and it takes you 3 months to get approval or go through the regulation, what did you do along that way that you could have applied AI to give approval in 1 or 2 days? So from a planning point of view, I think there's AI opportunities there. From building and design, I think there's opportunities for smarter designs. We have to be smarter in terms of how we build houses. They're so expensive now. We haven't changed the way we build houses. So using technology around the area of modular housing, prefabricated housing, housing in a factory. It's done around the world. We haven't really tapped into that opportunity. And all those areas are ripe for using technology like AI to improve the design, the efficiencies of approvals, and more innovative technologies in terms of how we build products. So it'll cover across all those areas. So I think it can be addressed. It's a long bow to draw in terms of homelessness, but I do think until we get more housing, more affordable housing and faster builds, we're going to be in trouble for a while.
Mm-hmm. Another one for you, which says from Slido again, thank you. What's the one major threat augmented by AI you think WA is least prepared for?
In terms of threat for us, I
Yep.
think the threat for industry is, there's a strategic alignment now occurring around the world. The Chinese model for AI, large language models, and then open source, open weights, that's a strategic plan from China to make that technology available to our industry and researchers around the world. And so you're really competing with closed models, closed source, pretty much where the US, the big US tech companies are going, and China leading the way in terms of open source, open weights. And if you're a small researcher and you want to get access to an open source model, your opportunity really now is to turn towards Chinese models and the innovation that's happening there. So this is a strategic risk in the long term in terms of what foundation we're going to build our research, our technology on, and how do we make sure that that doesn't become a strategic weakness for us in the long term. So we need to think really long and hard about our sovereignty in terms of the models themselves and how we play into that in the future.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, David. Mark, another question from Slido for you. Given Australia's current nuclear energy ban, what specific pathway and realistic timeline do you see for making nuclear-powered data centers actually viable here?
That is a very difficult question because it took 3 years to get the Perth Act approved, which established the new regulator, which then took another year. The new regulator went into effect on the 1st of November of this year. It was 4 years ago that the AUKUS agreement was signed. So it took 4 years from agreement till you had a law and a regulator in place for the Virginia-class submarine program or the nuclear program for naval nuclear propulsion in Australia. Now, that act, it lifted portions of the ARPANS Act of 1998, which created the ban of nuclear production, and it modified it to allow the construction of nuclear-powered submarines in Australia for the United States, for the United Kingdom, and for Australia. You can actually build Virginia-class submarines for the United States in Australia. I don't know if you knew that or not, but that's in the law. Specifically actually cited for those two nations. So you're looking at it's going to take probably several years to get through the debate process on that. If you can get a bill before to adjust that, you have to then add a regulator. Now, I will tell you this, having delved deeply into the Perth Act, it is definitely written more like a commercial regulator than it is a military regulatory program. So it would be very much a very simple upgrade, in my opinion, to get there. And the new regulations that came out recently also would just have to be modified. So you have actually a good framework from that perspective. ARPANSA, the current regulator for everything else that is not related with naval nuclear propulsion, has a very good track record. So you have some experience. But that's just to get to the starting line. And then once you have a starting line, then you have to go get a siting license, which means you have to do public consultation. And then from there, then you have to get your suppliers qualified, and then you have to get your construction license, and then you can finally start breaking ground. So I don't know how quickly that can occur in Australia. I know that's slow in the US with an existing program to get through that siting license into a construction license, getting through all those things. The US and Australia have some similarities. You're federated, the US has our individual states, so getting through an individual state's requirements, the US has that same issue, right? I know our friends in the United Kingdom don't have that issue. The King says it, it's good. It's a little easier for them, a little harder for us between the US and UK, or between the Australia and the United States. So there are a lot of challenges there. I think probably 10 years before you could break ground.
Thank you, Mark. Michelle, the last one from Slido. How is defense engaging on ethical aspect for any automation? How we simply accepted this in the new world and are in competition with others to have the best offense and defense tactics?
I shall just sort of say that everything that defence is doing is with the lens of deterrence, not attack. So the capabilities and everything that we're bringing in is to deter an attack on Australia. So it's so this is why we're having nuclear-powered submarines, because they're a good deterrence. They're let's just call it an undersea vehicle that is very stealth-like and can go long distances underwater, so no one actually knows where they are. The other capabilities that you bring in are other platforms and that to again ward off any potential attack that would come towards us. So that's where the hypersonic comes into the thing, which is, you know, having maybe a barrier up north, having some, you know, big missiles sitting there, hopefully that we never ever have to use, but they're there as a deterrence, and that's what defence's focus is.
As we have concluded earlier, that one of the bottlenecks is energy surplus. I want to get your concluding remarks by each of you, that what does energy surplus future looks like for you?
Sounds great.
So what does an energy surplus future looks like for you? What do you see?
Well, I can't see it at the moment in Australia, an energy surplus future. I think, you know, one of the challenges we've got is to build out that, you know, as we transition to solar and wind and battery technologies, we've got a huge catch-up in terms of our transmission line build-out, and that's going to take us many years to catch up to that build-out. So I don't think we're going to have an energy surplus in the short term. Hopefully, we'll get those settings right, and it will mean more affordable, available power for not only individuals, but also industry that we want to bring here, local manufacturing, and obviously in the area of AI compute technology will be abundant, and we'll have sovereignty around that abundant compute within Australia's borders.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, so, I mean, I can't speak for Australia. I mean, I think the things that David brought up were really good from the standpoint of building out the infrastructure. It's also upgrading the current infrastructure. No grid in the world was designed for two-way electrical generation. It wasn't designed for the homes to generate the electricity as well as the power stations. So having to figure out how we manage that is an engineering challenge that's on top of that. So it's an additional challenge. I'm not saying that wind and solar can't do it. If I were to decide an electrical mix, I would have a mixture of everything. I don't believe in a one solution mixture because it doesn't work that way, right? When the wind stops shining and the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, right? I need something to provide power. I think it was 7 days they had cloud cover in United Kingdom and had no wind blow. So they had 7 days where they were relying on everything that was not wind and solar. So I'm not saying that we can't use them, but having a mixture of everything, right? While yes, I'm a nuclear engineer, yes, my title is Chief Nuclear Officer, I'm not against gas, I'm not against coal, I'm not against geothermal, I'm not against any type of energy mix. It needs to be a mix for everything.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
And I'll just say that we just need to make sure we've got the right frameworks and governance in place to protect that critical infrastructure to support our energy transitions and our energy security.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Michelle.